Top 1. The Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle. In 1945, 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers lifted off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on a routine training mission known as Flight 19. The weather was clear. The sea below was calm. The pilots were experienced, their instruments calibrated, and their fuel tanks full. 90 minutes into the exercise, the flight leader radioed the tower with an unusual message. Both compasses were malfunctioning. The ocean beneath them no longer looked familiar. Landmarks had vanished. Within minutes, the transmission dissolved into static. The final words were fragmented and distorted. Then silence. A rescue plane dispatched to search for them also disappeared. No wreckage was ever recovered. What unfolded that afternoon should not have been possible. The Bermuda Triangle stretches roughly between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, covering over 500,000 square miles of open Atlantic. Over the decades, more than 1,000 ships and aircraft have reportedly vanished within its boundaries. The USS Cyclops, a 540-foot Navy cargo ship carrying over 300 men and 10,000 tons of manganese ore, disappeared in 1918 without issuing a distress call. The vessel sent no warning, no SOS, and left no debris field. Modern sonar sweeps have never located its remains. Witness accounts often describe sudden electromagnetic interference. Compasses spin, radios emit bursts of static. Radar blips vanish mid-transmission. Some pilots reported an odd haze as if flying through a translucent tunnel before losing orientation. In maritime cases, survivors have described walls of water rising without warning, followed by absolute disorientation. Instruments fail simultaneously, coordinates shift inexplicably. Mainstream explanations point to methane gas eruptions from the ocean floor. In theory, rising methane bubbles could reduce water density, causing ships to sink rapidly. Others cite rogue waves, powerful Gulf Stream currents, or simple human error amplified by unpredictable weather patterns. Magnetic variation in the region can cause compasses to deviate from true north. These are measurable phenomena. They are documented, they are real. But methane does not erase debris. Rogue waves do not silence every distress signal. Human error does not account for aircraft disappearing from radar without a trace in clear skies. Satellite imagery and advanced ocean mapping have revealed countless wrecks around the world, yet the Bermuda Triangle continues to produce cases with no physical remnants. The absence of wreckage is often more unsettling than the disappearance itself. Insurance companies do not officially recognize the Bermuda Triangle as uniquely dangerous. Governments deny any anomaly. Yet unofficial maritime logs show captains still alter course when possible. Pilots double-check instruments before entering the airspace. There is an unspoken acknowledgement that something in this corridor behaves unpredictably. If this were an isolated cluster of accidents, statistics would smooth it into probability. But the pattern has persisted for over a century. Different decades, different technologies, different nations. The geography remains constant. The vanishings continue. The Bermuda Triangle may be nothing more than a convergence of natural hazards, or it may represent something less understood, a region where navigation itself becomes unstable, where instruments falter and orientation dissolves. If a stretch of ocean can distort both perception and technology, then what exactly exists within its boundaries? And if it is only the first of several such zones scattered across the planet, then perhaps the greater question is not why people disappear there, but what kind of world allows these corridors to exist at all? Top 2. The Devil's Sea, the Devil's Sea. In 1952, the Japanese research vessel Kyomaru No. 5 was dispatched to investigate a series of strange maritime disturbances south of Tokyo. The region, located between Japan and the Mariana Islands, had gained a reputation among fishermen for compass failures, phantom lights above the horizon, and sudden violent seas appearing without warning. The crew of 31 scientists and sailors set out to document what many believed were submarine volcanic eruptions. Weeks later, the ship vanished. No distress call was received. No debris field was located. The last recorded coordinates placed it within an area sailors had long referred to in whispers as the Devil's Sea. The Devil's Sea, also known as the Dragon's Triangle, forms a rough triangular region off Japan's Pacific coast. Like its Atlantic counterpart, it has been associated with unexplained disappearances for centuries. Japanese folklore describes dragons rising from beneath the waves and pulling vessels into the depths. While mythology offers metaphor, modern reports provide something more concrete. Commercial fishing boats have disappeared during calm conditions. Military aircraft have reported sudden instrument malfunctions mid-flight. Merchant captains have logged erratic magnetic readings lasting several minutes before stabilizing without explanation. Unlike the Bermuda Triangle, this region is geologically active. The seafloor is dotted with undersea volcanoes and tectonic fractures. Scientists acknowledge that submarine eruptions can displace massive volumes of water, creating localized turbulence and even temporary whirlpools. Gas releases from volcanic vents may reduce buoyancy. Magnetic anomalies caused by shifting tectonic plates could influence navigation instruments. These explanations are scientifically plausible and partially supported by data. Yet the Kayo Maru No. 5 was not an unprepared fishing vessel. It was a government-sponsored research ship equipped with advanced monitoring instruments. Its mission was specifically to study volcanic activity. If an eruption had destroyed the vessel, some trace of wreckage should have surfaced. None was ever found. Japanese authorities quietly labeled the region dangerous and discouraged further civilian travel. Official reports were limited. International maritime bulletins mentioned volcanic hazards, but omitted discussion of unexplained vanishings. Pilots flying over the Devil's Sea have described sudden atmospheric distortions as if flying through invisible currents. One former commercial aviator recounted watching his altimeter fluctuate by hundreds of feet within seconds, while his aircraft remained level. Radar returns occasionally flicker and disappear, only to reappear miles from their previous position. These reports are rare, but consistent enough to raise concern among navigators. What distinguishes the Devil's Sea is its geographic symmetry with the Bermuda Triangle. Two vast oceans, two triangular regions, both associated with compass anomalies and missing vessels, both dismissed publicly as statistical coincidences or natural hazards. The parallel is difficult to ignore. Some geophysicists propose that certain oceanic corridors sit atop unstable electromagnetic zones, areas where Earth's magnetic field fluctuates more intensely than average. If true, these zones could temporarily disrupt navigation systems and distort radio transmissions. But electromagnetic interference alone does not account for ships that leave no oil slick, no floating cargo, no bodies. Over time, the Devil's Sea faded from international headlines, overshadowed by more visible disasters. Yet Japanese maritime agencies continue to monitor the region quietly. Fishing routes are adjusted. Naval patrols avoid specific coordinates during heightened seismic activity. Officially, the area poses no extraordinary threat beyond natural conditions. Unofficially, captains still glance twice at their compasses before entering its waters. If volcanic instability explains part of the mystery, it does not resolve all of it. The disappearances span decades, weather patterns, and vessel types. The ocean's surface closes quickly over what it takes, and once again, the pattern repeats. Instruments falter, orientation fails, communication ceases. If two distant oceans share nearly identical zones of vanishing, separated by thousands of miles yet mirrored in behavior, then coincidence becomes harder to accept. Are these merely hazardous waters shaped by geology? Or do certain coordinates on Earth behave differently under stress? And if the sea can conceal what it claims so completely, how many more corridors like this exist, unnoticed until someone else drifts into silence? Top 3. The Bennington Triangle. The Bennington Triangle. In 1946, on a cold December afternoon in the mountains of southern Vermont, a 74-year-old man named Mitty Rivers led a group of hunters along a familiar trail near Glastonbury Mountain. Rivers knew the terrain better than anyone. He had guided dozens of expeditions through those woods. At one point, he walked slightly ahead of the group, rounding a bend in the path. The hunters followed seconds later. He was gone. There was no scream, no sign of struggle. Snow lay undisturbed except for his footprints, which ended abruptly in the middle of the trail. Despite an extensive search covering hundreds of square miles, not a single trace of him was ever found. What occurred in that forest defied both logic and experience. Between 1945 and 1950, 5 people vanished within a roughly 10-mile radius centered around Glastonbury Mountain. Each disappearance occurred under different circumstances, yet shared an unsettling pattern. In 1945, a college student named Paula Weldon went hiking on the long trail and never returned. Witnesses saw her walking confidently along the path. She was dressed appropriately, carrying supplies. She disappeared in daylight. In 1949, a veteran named James Tedford vanished from a bus traveling through the area. The bus was occupied. Passengers recalled seeing him asleep in his seat. When the vehicle reached its next stop, his belongings remained. But he did not. These were not inexperienced travelers wandering into extreme wilderness. The Bennington region is rugged, but not impenetrable. Search teams combed the woods with dogs, aircraft, and hundreds of volunteers. Nothing surfaced. No clothing fragments. No remains. Not even partial evidence suggesting an accident. Authorities attributed the vanishings to misadventure, exposure, or possible foul play. Glastonbury Mountain contains abandoned logging roads, dense brush, and uneven terrain. A fall into a concealed ravine could prove fatal. Wildlife, such as black bears, roam the region. In winter, temperatures drop rapidly, increasing the risk of hypothermia. Statistically, hikers do go missing in remote forests every year, but the pattern in Bennington feels different. The disappearances were clustered tightly in time and location. 2 victims vanished within 3 years. Several were within sight of companions moments before. James Tedford's case remains especially troubling. A man does not simply dissolve from a moving bus without someone noticing. His seat was near the rear. Other passengers were within arm's reach. Local folklore predates the 1940s incidents. Native American tribes reportedly avoided the area, referring to it as cursed ground. Legends speak of a stone formation known as the Bennington Stone, marking a boundary between safe land and something else. While folklore cannot serve as evidence, it adds another layer to the atmosphere surrounding Glastonbury Mountain. Modern investigators have revisited the cases with renewed interest. Some suggest that the area's magnetic variations could cause disorientation. Others speculate about sinkholes, hidden mine shafts, or even criminal activity concealed by rugged terrain. Yet no definitive explanation has emerged. The forest does not yield what it takes. What makes the Bennington Triangle particularly unsettling is its intimacy. This is not a vast ocean swallowing ships. This is a narrow corridor of woodland where people vanish within earshot of others. The disappearances occurred in daylight, along established trails, in the presence of witnesses. It is one thing to become lost in thousands of square miles of open water. It is another to vanish in a forest measured in single digits of miles. Over time, the frequency of disappearances declined. The mountain remains accessible. Hikers still walk its trails, but something lingers in the record. 5 vanishings. No bodies, no conclusions. A localized pattern that flared and then subsided, as if a window briefly opened and then closed. If geography alone were responsible, similar clusters would appear everywhere dense forest exists. Yet few places have produced such a concentrated series of vanishings within so small an area. The Bennington Triangle stands as a reminder that not all mysteries are hidden in distant seas. Some are embedded quietly within ordinary landscapes. If a man can step around a bend in a wooded path and cease to exist in any recoverable form, then what exactly failed in that moment? Navigation, perception, or something more fundamental about the space itself? Top 4. The Hoya Baciu Forest. The Hoya Baciu Forest. In 1968, a Romanian military technician named Emil Barnea was walking through the Hoya Baciu Forest near Cluj-Napoca when he noticed something unusual above the treetops. A metallic object, disc-shaped and silent, hovered briefly against the afternoon sky. He raised his camera and captured a photograph before the object accelerated and disappeared. The image was later examined by specialists and declared authentic, with no visible signs of manipulation. Yet the photograph was only a fragment of the forest's reputation. For decades, Hoya Baciu had been associated not only with unexplained lights, but with disappearances that left no trace behind. The forest spans roughly 700 acres, modest compared to vast national parks, yet it carries a disproportionate number of unsettling reports. Visitors describe sudden disorientation, intense anxiety, and the sensation of being watched. Compasses spin unpredictably. GPS devices lose signal without warning. Batteries drain rapidly. In several recorded instances, hikers claimed to have lost hours of time, emerging from the woods convinced they had been inside only minutes. Watches stop. Cameras malfunction. Audio recorders capture bursts of static or low-frequency hums. At the center of the forest lies a circular clearing, approximately 100 feet in diameter, where no vegetation grows. The soil composition appears normal. No toxins or radiation spikes have been confirmed. Yet trees surrounding the clearing exhibit twisted growth patterns, their trunks bent at unnatural angles. Botanists attribute the distortions to environmental stress or fungal infection. Geologists suggest underground mineral deposits may affect plant development. These explanations account for some anomalies, but not all. Disappearance reports date back centuries in local folklore. Shepherds were said to have wandered into the woods and never returned. In more recent decades, several individuals reportedly vanished temporarily, only to reappear days later confused and unable to explain where they had been. One widely discussed account involves a 5-year-old girl who disappeared while playing near the forest edge and was found days later wearing the same clothes, unable to recall any passage of time. Official documentation for such cases is sparse, often limited to anecdotal testimony and local police notes. Skeptics argue that Hoya Bachiu's reputation influences perception. Expectation can distort experience. When visitors enter anticipating fear, ordinary forest sounds become amplified. Shadows appear unnatural. Magnetic irregularities may be minor fluctuations exaggerated by unreliable handheld devices. Psychological suggestion is a powerful force. The human mind fills gaps in perception with narrative. Yet even skeptics acknowledge consistent electromagnetic readings recorded by independent investigators. In certain zones, magnetometers register sudden spikes that dissipate within seconds. Thermal cameras occasionally capture cold spots drifting through the clearing without visible cause. These anomalies do not persist long enough for comprehensive study. They appear, then fade. Unlike oceanic triangles defined by vast emptiness, Hoya Baciu feels contained. It is bounded, measurable, mapped. And yet within its borders, perception seems unstable. The forest floor is solid ground. There are no open seas, no hidden sinkholes large enough to swallow entire search parties unnoticed. Still, the pattern remains. Equipment fails, time slips, orientation dissolves. The Romanian government has not declared the forest restricted. Tourists visit regularly. Paranormal investigators conduct night watches. No official body has confirmed the presence of any extraordinary phenomenon. Yet the circular clearing remains barren. The twisted trees persist, and the stories continue to accumulate. If Hoya Baciu were merely a site of superstition, its reputation would have faded. Instead, it has grown. Photographs, instrument readings, and consistent experiential reports suggest something interacts with both environment and perception. Whether that interaction stems from natural geomagnetic irregularities or something less understood remains unresolved. What makes the forest particularly unsettling is not the idea of disappearance alone, but the distortion of time and direction. Losing one's path is common in wooded terrain. Losing measurable hours without explanation is not. If certain coordinates can interfere with electronic signals and human orientation simultaneously, then perhaps the phenomenon is not limited to water or air. Perhaps it is embedded in the fabric of certain landscapes themselves. Top 5. The Bridgewater Triangle. The Bridgewater Triangle. In 1978, a group of teenagers drove down a dark stretch of road near Freetown, Massachusetts, when their headlights flickered and dimmed without warning. Moments later, a large, shadowy figure was reported standing at the edge of the tree line. The driver attempted to accelerate, but the engine stalled. The radio emitted a burst of static before cutting out entirely. Within seconds, a bright light appeared above the swamp to their left, hovering silently before vanishing into the sky. The car restarted as abruptly as it had failed. The encounter lasted less than a minute. It was not the first time something unusual had been reported within what locals call the Bridgewater Triangle. Spanning roughly 200 square miles in southeastern Massachusetts, the Bridgewater Triangle encompasses forests, swamps, abandoned quarries, and small towns. At its center lies the Hockomock Swamp, a dense wetland covering nearly 16,000 acres. The name Hockomock translates to the place where spirits dwell in the Algonquin language. Long before modern reports, Native American tribes described the area as spiritually volatile, a location to avoid after dark. Since the 1960s, the region has accumulated a remarkable range of unexplained incidents. Numerous hikers and hunters have gone missing within the swamp and surrounding woods. Some vanish without trace. Others are found disoriented miles from where they were last seen, unable to explain how they arrived there. Law enforcement attributes most cases to the difficulty of navigating marshland terrain. The swamp contains hidden water channels, unstable ground, and thick underbrush capable of concealing a body indefinitely. Yet Bridgewater differs from previous cases in one significant way. Disappearances are only part of a broader pattern. Residents report unidentified aerial lights, large animal sightings inconsistent with local wildlife, and sudden electromagnetic disruptions. Police officers have documented unexplained radar returns over the swamp. In 1994, a series of power outages occurred across multiple towns, coinciding with sightings of triangular craft moving silently overhead. Utility companies reported no equipment failures. Mainstream explanations focus on environmental hazards. Wetlands can generate swamp gas, creating luminous phenomena that resemble hovering lights. Psychological suggestion can amplify fear in isolated areas. Misidentification of animals, particularly black bears or large birds, can account for some creature reports. These interpretations address fragments of the narrative, but they do not resolve the overlap of events within such a confined geographic boundary. Bridgewater's uniqueness lies in the convergence of phenomena, disappearances, electronic interference, aerial sightings, animal anomalies. It is as if multiple categories of unexplained events intersect within the same coordinates. Researchers have mapped incident reports over decades, revealing clusters concentrated around specific sections of Hockomock Swamp and Freetown State Forest. The density of reports fluctuates, but the pattern persists. Unlike the vastness of the Bermuda Triangle or the remoteness of Alaska, Bridgewater sits near populated suburbs. Major highways run along its edges. Residential neighborhoods border its perimeter. Yet within this ordinary setting, a corridor of irregularity remains. Access has never been officially restricted. There are no warning signs declaring danger beyond typical wilderness advisories. What distinguishes Bridgewater is not a single catastrophic disappearance, but repetition across categories. A hiker vanishes. A patrol car radio fails. A luminous sphere hovers above the swamp. Weeks later, a similar event occurs miles away within the same boundary. Individually, each incident might be dismissed. Together, they suggest a zone where environmental and electromagnetic stability appear inconsistent. If certain landscapes can generate light anomalies or magnetic fluctuations, then perhaps Bridgewater is simply geologically complex. But the persistence across decades raises another possibility. What if specific geographic intersections amplify both natural forces and human perception simultaneously? What if the swamp acts as a focal point, concentrating phenomena rather than producing them? In earlier cases, oceans swallowed ships. Forests consumed hikers. Here the pattern expands. The anomaly does not limit itself to one expression. It shifts forms from disappearance to interference to luminous display. The Bridgewater Triangle does not simply remove people from record. It destabilizes the environment around them. If a region can host multiple categories of unexplained activity at once, then perhaps the phenomenon is not isolated to a single cause. Perhaps it is structural. Top 6. The Alaska Triangle. The Alaska Triangle. In October 1972, a small twin-engine Cessna carrying U.S. House Majority Leader Hale Boggs vanished while flying from Anchorage to Juneau. On board were Congressman Nick Begich, an aide, and the pilot. The weather conditions were reported as manageable. The aircraft transmitted no distress signal. Search and rescue teams combed over 325,000 square miles of wilderness using military aircraft, ground crews, and advanced tracking systems. It became one of the largest search operations in American history. No wreckage was ever recovered, not a fragment of wing, not a trace of fuel. The plane and the men aboard seemed to dissolve into the Alaskan landscape. The area defined as the Alaska Triangle stretches between Anchorage, Juneau, and Utqiagvik, covering vast mountain ranges, glaciers, dense forests, and tundra. Since the 1970s, over 20,000 people have been reported missing within this region. While Alaska's extreme terrain accounts for some disappearances, the rate remains disproportionately high relative to its population density. Pilots, hunters, hikers, and even experienced outdoorsmen have vanished without leaving recoverable evidence. The environment is undeniably unforgiving. Sudden weather shifts can trap aircraft in low visibility conditions. Snow and ice can obscure wreckage indefinitely. Glacial crevasses swallow debris. Bears and other wildlife can scatter remains. These realities form the backbone of official explanations. In a state defined by wilderness, accidents are expected. Yet certain patterns challenge this framework. Aircraft equipped with emergency locator transmitters have disappeared without activating distress beacons. Planes flying under controlled conditions have vanished from radar in clear skies. Search teams often report faint radio signals that appear briefly before fading entirely. In some instances, electronic navigation systems malfunction simultaneously across multiple devices. Indigenous folklore predates modern aviation. Tlingit and Athabascan legends describe Kushtaka, shape-shifting beings said to lure travelers away. While mythology cannot serve as empirical evidence, it highlights a long-standing perception of unpredictability in the land. The terrain itself is complex. Mountain ranges disrupt magnetic fields. Solar storms at high latitudes interfere with radio transmission. These phenomena are scientifically documented. However, the scale of vanishings remains unsettling. Unlike the tightly clustered disappearances of Bennington, Alaska's cases are dispersed across immense distances. Yet when mapped, many fall within triangular corridors that overlap consistently. Independent researchers have noted intersections of tectonic fault lines and geomagnetic irregularities across parts of the triangle. Satellite data reveals subtle magnetic flux variations, though none officially classified as dangerous. What makes the Alaska Triangle distinct is its sheer magnitude. Vastness provides plausible cover for any number of accidents. A plane could crash in a remote valley and remain undiscovered for decades. A hiker could succumb to exposure miles from a trail. But when search operations utilizing military aircraft, infrared scanning, and thousands of personnel fail to locate even fragments, the absence becomes its own anomaly. In several cases, families have continued independent searches years later, only to encounter unexplained equipment failures. GPS units freeze. Batteries drain unexpectedly in certain valleys. Radio contact weakens at specific coordinates. These incidents remain anecdotal but consistent enough to warrant attention. Unlike Bridgewater's layered phenomena or Hoyabashu's time distortions, Alaska presents something more expansive. It is not a localized clearing or swamp. It is an immense corridor of instability spanning mountains and tundra. The vanishings are not concentrated in one forest or one swamp, but distributed across an entire region defined by geographic extremes. If environmental hazard explains many cases, it does not resolve all of them. The disappearance of a high-profile political figure aboard a well-equipped aircraft, despite massive search efforts, remains unresolved decades later. The cumulative number of missing persons suggests more than isolated tragedy. When a region consistently erases both people and machines without leaving recoverable evidence, the question shifts. It is no longer about a single accident. It becomes about the reliability of the space itself. If vast stretches of land can swallow aircraft and hikers without trace, then what kind of stability does that landscape truly offer? The Alaska Triangle does not rely on myth to sustain its mystery. It relies on numbers, and the numbers remain uncomfortably high. Top 7. The Lake Michigan Triangle. The Lake Michigan Triangle. In 1950, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2D501 was approaching Chicago after departing from New York. The aircraft, a Douglas DC-4 carrying 58 people, requested permission to descend from 3,500 feet to 2,500 feet due to severe turbulence over Lake Michigan. Moments later, radar contact was lost. The plane never reached shore. A massive search operation recovered only scattered debris and small fragments of human remains. The main fuselage was never located. The disappearance occurred within a region that would later be defined as the Lake Michigan Triangle. an area bounded by Manitowoc, Ludington, and Benton Harbor. Lake Michigan is not an ocean. It spans approximately 22,400 square miles, bordered by major cities and commercial shipping lanes. It is heavily trafficked, constantly monitored, and far smaller than the Atlantic or Pacific. Yet within a triangular corridor across its southern basin, ships and aircraft have vanished with patterns disturbingly similar to oceanic cases. In 1891, the schooner Thomas Hume disappeared while sailing from Chicago to Muskegon. Conditions were stable. The vessel never arrived. Decades later, in 1921, the freighter Rosa Belle was found capsized, with no crew aboard. The hull showed signs of collision, yet no other vessel reported impact. In several cases, ships were discovered intact but abandoned, with lifeboats still secured and cargo untouched. Modern reports introduce an additional layer. In 2007, a private pilot flying over the lake reported that his instruments began fluctuating erratically. For approximately 30 seconds, both his compass and altimeter displayed inconsistent readings before stabilizing without explanation. He later described the experience as flying through a dense invisible barrier. Similar accounts from other pilots include brief radar disappearances, where aircraft momentarily vanish from tracking screens before reappearing miles away. Mainstream explanations focus on Lake Michigan's volatile weather. Sudden squalls and powerful microbursts can develop rapidly. The lake's depth, reaching over 900 feet in places, can conceal wreckage beneath layers of sediment. Strong currents may scatter debris quickly. These factors undoubtedly account for many maritime accidents. The lake's history includes numerous documented shipwrecks attributable to storms. However, the Lake Michigan Triangle presents anomalies beyond severe weather. Several disappearances occurred during calm conditions. Radar logs from certain incidents suggest brief tracking interruptions inconsistent with equipment malfunction. In some cases, crews reported unusual haze or luminous phenomena prior to losing contact. What distinguishes Lake Michigan from its oceanic counterparts is proximity. This is not a remote expanse of water thousands of miles from civilization. It lies between densely populated states. Commercial shipping and aviation corridors cross it daily. Its surface is surveyed continuously. If a vessel sinks, search teams can deploy within hours. Yet the Central Triangle continues to produce cases where primary wreckage remains unrecovered decades later. Researchers have speculated about localized magnetic anomalies caused by mineral deposits beneath the lakebed. Geological surveys indicate varying magnetic intensity across sections of the basin. If aircraft and ships pass through zones of fluctuating magnetic fields, navigation systems may temporarily destabilize. But even if instruments fail, human pilots and captains are trained to compensate. The Lake Michigan Triangle also carries an unusual claim recorded in the early 20th century. A captain navigating the lake allegedly reported witnessing a thick fog envelop his ship, during which his crew observed the shoreline appear distorted, as if the horizon had shifted. While such testimony remains anecdotal, it echoes descriptions from other triangular regions where visibility and orientation degrade simultaneously. The pattern mirrors previous cases. Water, instrument interference, disappearance without sufficient debris. Yet this time the setting is confined, measurable, and heavily monitored. The lake is a controlled environment compared to open ocean. If anomalies occur here under observation, they cannot be dismissed as artifacts of vastness alone. If electromagnetic irregularities or atmospheric conditions briefly distort navigation, then perhaps Lake Michigan is simply another example of natural instability. But the repetition across multiple triangular regions separated by geography suggests something broader. From Atlantic to Pacific to freshwater basin, similar patterns emerge. When an aircraft disappears over a lake surrounded by cities, the margin for error narrows. And when debris fails to account fully for what was lost, the question deepens. If even enclosed bodies of water can host these vanishings, then the anomaly is not limited to remote wilderness or distant seas. It is closer than assumed. Top 8. The Nevada Triangle. The Nevada Triangle. In 2007, a private aircraft flying from Reno to San Jose vanished over the Sierra Nevada mountains. The weather was stable. The pilot was experienced. Air traffic control recorded routine communication until the signal abruptly ceased. Radar tracked the plane descending slightly before disappearing from the screen entirely. Search teams deployed helicopters, ground crews, and infrared scanning equipment across hundreds of square miles. Months passed without discovery. The rugged terrain was blamed. Yet this was only one entry in a much larger record of disappearances within what aviation experts now refer to as the Nevada Triangle. The Nevada Triangle encompasses a region stretching from Reno to Fresno and Las Vegas, covering vast desert basins, mountain ranges, and restricted military airspace. Since World War II, more than 2,000 aircraft incidents have been recorded within this corridor. While not all resulted in vanishings, the concentration of crashes and missing planes far exceeds comparable regions of similar size. The geography is harsh. The Sierra Nevada contains peaks rising over 14,000 feet. Sudden downdrafts, thin air at altitude, and unpredictable winds challenge even seasoned pilots. Many accidents have clear explanations tied to mechanical failure, spatial disorientation, or weather shifts. The desert floor can conceal wreckage beneath sand and rock. In winter, snow can bury debris until spring thaw. However, certain cases defy straightforward classification. Some aircraft disappear under optimal flying conditions with no reported distress. In several documented incidents, emergency locator transmitters failed to activate. Search crews report faint intermittent signals that vanish when approached. Wreckage, when eventually found, is sometimes discovered miles from projected flight paths without clear indication of catastrophic failure. The Nevada Triangle differs from other regions due to its proximity to highly classified military installations. Portions of the area overlap with restricted airspace surrounding test ranges and experimental facilities. While no official statement links military activity to disappearances, the concentration of secrecy complicates investigation. Radar data is occasionally withheld for security reasons. Certain coordinates are inaccessible to civilian search teams. Pilots who frequently cross the region describe subtle instrument anomalies, compasses that drift unexpectedly, autopilot systems that disengage without warning, static bursts disrupting radio contact for several seconds at a time. These occurrences are rare, but consistent enough to be noted in aviation forums and flight logs. In most cases, systems recalibrate quickly, and flights continue without further issue. Mainstream aviation authorities attribute the majority of incidents to environmental complexity. Mountain wave turbulence can be severe and invisible. High-density altitude reduces engine performance. Human error remains a leading factor in small aircraft accidents. These explanations are grounded in aerodynamics and supported by decades of data. Yet the sheer number of unresolved disappearances within a defined triangular corridor remains difficult to ignore. Unlike the open ocean, where debris can disperse beyond recovery, the Nevada Triangle lies within continental airspace, subject to frequent monitoring. Aircraft pass overhead daily. Military radar installations scan the skies continuously. And still, planes vanish without transmitting final coordinates. What sets Nevada apart is the intersection of wilderness and secrecy. Harsh terrain offers natural concealment. Restricted zones limit transparency. When an aircraft disappears within such a region, public records often provide minimal detail. Families wait for answers that never materialize. Investigations close with inconclusive findings. If extreme geography accounts for many losses, it does not resolve the pattern entirely. The overlap between high accident rates and instrument irregularities suggests instability beyond mere terrain. The desert sky appears empty, vast, predictable. Yet within this triangular corridor, aircraft sometimes lose orientation as if crossing an invisible boundary. From ocean to forest to freshwater lake, the pattern has persisted. Now it extends into dry desert airspace. The medium changes, but the outcome remains similar. Communication falters. Navigation destabilizes. Physical evidence proves elusive. If certain coordinates disrupt both oceanic and aerial travel, then the anomaly is not limited to water. It operates in air as well. And when that airspace intersects with restricted military corridors, the answers become even harder to access. Top 9. The Lake Anjikuni Disappearance Site. The Lake Anjikuni Disappearance Site. In November 1930, a Canadian fur trapper named Joe Labelle traveled along the shores of Lake Anjikuni in the remote Northern Territory of Canada. He had visited a small Inuit village there many times before, trading supplies and sharing meals with its residents. As he approached the settlement that winter evening, he expected to see smoke rising from stone chimneys and dogs tethered outside snow-covered huts. Instead, he found silence. The fires were extinguished. The food stores were untouched. Rifles leaned against walls. Clothing remained folded inside shelters. The entire village, reportedly consisting of dozens of people, had vanished without trace. It was as if life had paused mid-movement and never resumed. According to early newspaper accounts, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were notified and conducted an investigation. Reports claim that graves in the nearby cemetery appeared disturbed. Sled dogs were allegedly found dead, still tied in place, having starved despite access to food supplies stored nearby. Snow around the settlement showed no footprints leading away. If the story were accurate, it suggested not a gradual migration, but a sudden and complete disappearance. Lake Anjikuni lies in an isolated region of Nunavut, hundreds of miles from major settlements. Winters are severe, with temperatures dropping far below zero and daylight limited. Survival requires preparation and coordination. Entire communities do not relocate overnight without leaving evidence. Mainstream historians later challenged the original accounts, arguing that documentation was exaggerated or fabricated by newspapers seeking sensational stories. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police have stated that no official records confirm such a mass disappearance, yet the persistence of the narrative is itself noteworthy. Multiple publications in the early 20th century reported similar details. Some independent researchers claim that older RCMP logs referenced an abandoned settlement near the lake, though the scale may have been smaller than reported. Oral traditions among local Inuit communities describe seasonal movement patterns, suggesting that the village may have migrated under extreme conditions. The challenge with Lake Anjikuni lies in conflicting documentation. On one hand, official statements dismiss the mass disappearance as legend. On the other, early records describe specific details, too structured to dismiss entirely. If the village relocated due to famine or environmental pressure, why were supplies reportedly left behind? If the story was embellished, why did it endure across decades? The geography of the region complicates verification. Harsh climate and remote access limit thorough archaeological study. Snowfall can obscure traces within hours. Wildlife can disturb graves and remains. The Arctic landscape shifts constantly under freeze and thaw cycles. What differentiates Lake Anjikuni from previous cases is scale. This is not a single aircraft or hiker. It is the suggestion of an entire community vanishing collectively. Even if numbers were exaggerated, the idea of a populated settlement abandoned abruptly remains unsettling. In remote regions, survival depends on cooperation. To disappear without coordinated migration implies urgency or external pressure. Unlike oceanic triangles defined by electromagnetic irregularities, this case centers on land and human habitation. No reported compass failures, no radar anomalies. Instead, an absence where activity should have been, a stillness that contradicted routine. Skeptics argue that the story reflects journalistic embellishment, that no credible mass disappearance occurred. Yet even if the scale was reduced, the underlying pattern resonates with earlier regions. People vanish within defined coordinates. Evidence proves insufficient. Official documentation conflicts with anecdotal record. Lake Anjikuni occupies a different category within the broader pattern. It introduces the possibility that not only travelers, but entire populations may vanish under certain conditions. Whether exaggerated or partially factual, the narrative persists because it taps into something fundamental. The idea that a community, rooted in harsh terrain for generations, could disappear without leaving a recoverable trail. If environmental hardship explains migration, then the story is tragic but natural. If documentation was distorted, then the mystery dissolves into folklore. Yet if even a fragment of the account reflects reality, then the pattern deepens. Not only do isolated individuals vanish across triangular corridors. In rare instances, collective absence enters the record. When silence replaces a living settlement overnight, the absence becomes louder than any recorded anomaly. Top 10. The Puerto Rico Trench Entry Zone. The Puerto Rico Trench Entry Zone, On the night of October 28, 2013, air traffic control at Rafael Hernandez Airport in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, detected an unidentified object entering restricted airspace from the Atlantic Ocean. It emitted no transponder signal. It moved low and fast, hugging the coastline before crossing directly over the runway. A U.S. Customs and Border Protection aircraft equipped with infrared cameras tracked the object as it glided inland, then turned sharply and descended toward the ocean. The thermal footage shows the object entering the water without slowing down, without producing a splash, and without generating a visible heat signature change. Seconds later, it appears to re-emerge and split into two separate objects before accelerating away. The entire sequence lasted less than 3 minutes. No official explanation was issued. The Aguadilla incident is one of many reports clustered around the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean, plunging over 27,000 feet beneath the surface. The trench lies north of Puerto Rico and has long been associated with unusual sonar readings, unidentified aerial phenomena, and unexplained disappearances of both aircraft and vessels. Fishermen operating in the region have reported luminous spheres rising silently from the water before ascending vertically into the night sky. Naval sonar operators have described high-speed underwater objects moving at velocities exceeding conventional submarine capability. In some cases, sonar contacts have shifted from underwater to airborne tracking within seconds. These reports remain largely confined to military or maritime channels and rarely enter mainstream discussion. Mainstream explanations for the Aguadilla footage include drones, weather balloons, optical artifacts, and thermal imaging distortions. Analysts have proposed that the apparent water entry was an illusion caused by camera angle and temperature blending between object and ocean surface. However, independent aerospace engineers reviewing the footage have noted acceleration patterns inconsistent with known drone propulsion. The object displayed rapid directional changes without deceleration arcs, typical of fixed-wing or rotary aircraft. What distinguishes the Puerto Rico Trench from other triangular regions is the seamless transition between air and sea. Earlier cases involved oceanic disappearance, forest vanishings, or aerial loss of contact. Here, the medium itself appears permeable. The object tracked in 2013 behaved as if water presented no barrier. If natural phenomena are responsible, they must account not only for flight dynamics, but also underwater maneuverability at extreme depth. The trench's geology is complex. Tectonic plates converge in the region, generating seismic instability. Magnetic field variations have been documented along fault lines. Deep ocean currents create pressure gradients capable of affecting sonar returns. These environmental factors could theoretically produce anomalous readings, yet they do not account for visual infrared footage of a structured object maintaining consistent velocity across two mediums. Military presence in the region is significant. Naval exercises occur regularly. Surveillance arrays monitor submarine activity. Official silence surrounds most unusual reports. Declassified documents reference unidentified subaqueous contacts, but provide minimal elaboration. When incidents surface publicly, they are often attributed to misidentification. The Puerto Rico Trench represents the culmination of a broader pattern. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, from freshwater lakes to desert airspace, triangular corridors have produced disappearances and instrument instability. Here, however, the anomaly evolves. It is not merely about vanishings. It is about transit, movement between environments without apparent limitation. If environmental instability explains oceanic sinkings and aerial disorientation, it does not explain controlled trajectory changes captured on infrared systems. If military technology accounts for the footage, it implies propulsion capabilities far beyond acknowledged aerospace engineering. Unlike forests that swallow hikers or seas that conceal wreckage, the trench suggests something else. An entry point, a zone where boundary conditions appear altered. The absence in earlier regions left unanswered questions. Here the footage introduces a new one. If objects can move from sky to sea without resistance, then what defines the limits of those spaces? And if such movement has been occurring beneath commercial flight paths and shipping lanes, how often has it been mistaken for disappearance? The Puerto Rico Trench does not simply remove people from record. It hints at a corridor where presence and absence intersect. If triangular regions around the globe represent structural weak points in geography or physics, then this trench may be one of the deepest. These disappearances reveal a troubling pattern. They are not confined to a single ocean, forest, or mountain range. They occur across continents, across climates, across decades. From the Bermuda Triangle to the Devil's Sea, from the forests of Vermont to the frozen expanse of Alaska, defined corridors of geography continue to produce the same outcome. Communication fails, instruments destabilize, witnesses vanish, and in many cases, physical evidence proves incomplete or entirely absent. This is not simply a collection of isolated tragedies. It is a recurring sequence of anomalies linked by location and repetition. Certain coordinates appear again and again in reports of missing aircraft, abandoned vessels, distorted radar returns, and unexplained silence. Governments acknowledge the accidents but rarely address the clustering. Radar logs are archived. Search efforts conclude without resolution. Families are left with probability in place of answers. If these regions represent nothing more than environmental hazard, then the statistical distribution should scatter evenly across similar terrain worldwide. Instead, triangular corridors emerge repeatedly. Maritime authorities reroute cautiously. Pilots double-check instruments before crossing specific airspace. Military installations monitor certain coordinates with unusual attention. Yet no formal recognition of a global pattern has ever been issued. The cost is not measured only in lost lives. It is measured in lost data, lost understanding, and the possibility that certain physical behaviors of our planet remain unexamined. If electromagnetic instability or tectonic stress produces these effects, then comprehensive public study would follow. Instead, discussion often narrows to coincidence or human error. Each case is compartmentalized. Each disappearance becomes singular. But taken together, the pattern grows difficult to ignore. Ocean, forest, desert, lake, trench. Different environments, similar disruptions. If navigation systems falter in defined corridors, if physical evidence dissolves without adequate trace, then either our mapping of risk is incomplete or our understanding of spatial stability is limited. The question is no longer where the missing have gone. The question is what kind of structure allows such corridors to exist. Are they natural concentrations of instability embedded in Earth's geology and magnetism? Or do they represent intersections of forces we have not yet fully measured? The tragedy may not lie solely in the vanishings themselves. It may lie in the possibility that the pattern is visible, documented, and still treated as coincidence. Until the anomalies are studied as a system rather than dismissed as isolated events, the corridors remain. And somewhere within them, silence continues to answer every distress call with the same reply. If these accounts of the world's most mysterious corridors have changed the way you look at the maps of our planet, please subscribe and like the channel. We are dedicated to unearthing the history and anomalies that have been hidden in plain sight. Help us cultivate a deeper understanding of the unknown. Our next investigation into the world's greatest secrets will be revealed soon.